Hey guys, welcome back to the garden. On today's video, I'll be sharing with you 10 different plants that you can grow in your garden for free with very minimal effort. Okay, quick disclaimer, it's not totally free. You do still have to buy the original plant or the original seeds, but once you have them in your garden, then they are so easy to grow for free in future seasons. Now, if you're interested in a certain plant that I'm talking about today, I'll be sure to timestamp them in the video so it's easier to find the plant that you are looking for. Now, before we get started, please make sure that if you do enjoy this video, you give it a like, share it around, and subscribe if you haven't already, as that's going to help my channel out a lot. But without further ado, let's get started. Plant number one is lettuce, like this beautiful head of lettuce that I've got behind me here. I've actually got a few different varieties of lettuce growing in the garden, and in this space behind me, I've got two different varieties. The first one here is called Amish deer tongue, and then I've got one down here in the pathway called Australian looseleaf. Now, there's a few different lettuces in this space, and I didn't plant any of the seeds for the lettuces. They all sprouted themselves. Now, you may be wondering, how can I get lettuce sprouting in my garden without actually planting the seeds? And that's because, although I didn't plant the seeds for these lettuces, I did plant the seeds for this variety a few seasons ago. And with those plants, I let them go to seed, and the seeds have gone throughout my garden, and the plants germinate when the conditions are right. You've got two options. You can either collect the seeds, take them inside and store them in a paper bag for you to plant in your garden yourself when you're ready, or you can leave them on the plant and let the wind and nature do its own thing, and the wind will blow the seeds throughout your garden, which means that you will have free plants popping up in your garden when the conditions are right. Plant number two is the tomato. Now, although you can get any type of tomato self-seeding in your garden, it is especially easy for the cherry tomato, just like this one here behind me. And just like the lettuce, I didn't actually plant this plant. It just self-seeded by itself in the garden last spring. Now, we are in winter, and tomato is an annual in our climate. However, this area of the garden is pretty protected and sheltered, and it hasn't been touched by the frost, which is usually what kills it in the winter. So this plant is still booming, and we are still getting lots of delicious little cherry tomatoes, which is fantastic. Over here in the pathway, where it is a bit more exposed, the vine has started to die back, but in this area we've got little flowers and young cherry tomatoes, which is really great. The cherry tomato, in my experience, is often the plant that is the most hardy against really hot weather or against cold weather. It's always in my garden the last variety of tomato to live into the winter, whereas the bigger varieties have often died back. Now, there are other ways that you can propagate your tomato plant without growing them from seed. I did do a video on that, so make sure you check that out. And that is by taking cuttings from your tomato plant. It is really easy to do, and tomato plants often take root really, really easily. So that is a fantastic way to propagate your tomato plants if you want a quicker way to have more plants without starting them from seed. But the tomato plant is plant number two for having in your garden and multiplying your plants for free. Plant number three is the pumpkin. Now, did you know that all parts of the pumpkin fruit and the plant are edible? So you've got the skin, the flesh, and the seeds inside the pumpkin. And then on the plant, you've got the flowers and the leaves, which is pretty cool. The pumpkin is an annual, just like the tomato, and it's grown in spring and summer, so in the warm seasons of the year. Now, you may be wondering, how can you get free pumpkin plants growing in your garden? Well, inside each pumpkin, there is a small cavity filled with seeds. So when you cut open your pumpkin, scoop out those seeds, set them aside to dry, And you've got two options. You can either save them in a paper bag to plant out in springtime in your garden, or if you happen to have a pumpkin that you accidentally left outside on the vine for too long, or perhaps it was starting to get eaten by bugs, so you've just left it there and it started to rot down into the earth. Well, there are still seeds inside that pumpkin, and when the conditions are right in spring, you will have little pumpkin seedlings growing up in that spot. This is what happened to me last spring. In fact, I didn't even notice that I had a small pumpkin that had dropped off the vine because I was trellising it. And before I knew it, there was a little patch filled with pumpkin seedlings. It was pretty cool, but unfortunately I couldn't plant them. I couldn't transplant them because we were already in autumn in that point, and the plant doesn't grow in autumn. Plant number 4 is Silverbeet or Swiss chard, depending on where you live. Now, Silverbeet is one of my absolute favorite free plants to grow in the veggie garden, because not only is it so easy to grow, but you can get thousands of seeds just from the one plant. Now, Silverbeet is a biennial plant, so that means it takes 2 years to complete its life cycle. So unlike lettuce, where you'll have it going to seed in the first year, Silverbeet in the second year, that's when you'll have that stalk coming up from the middle of the Silverbeet, and you'll have your seeds at the top of that. Now, I tend to just leave the seeds on the plant and let them dry out. And as the plant tends to dry and go brittle, the stem will snap, it will fall over, and then the seeds go on the ground, and all of these little Silverbeet plants will germinate on their own when the conditions are right. So check out all of these Silverbeet plants here. Now, obviously, it's not ideal to have all of these Silverbeet plants growing in the one spot. There's just not enough space. So you will need to dig them up and transfer them elsewhere into the garden. But the good news with Silverbeet is that it transplants really well, providing when you do transplant it, don't do it in the middle of the day. Choose a time early in the morning or late in the afternoon when the temperature has started cooling off, and make sure you give it a really good watering when you have planted it in its new spot as well. Once you have Silverbeet growing in your garden, I don't think you'll ever have to plant it again, as long as you let a plant, even one plant, go to seed. You'll have Silverbeet forever. Plant number 5 is the potato. Now, varieties of potatoes are separated into 3 groups. You have early, mid-season, and late. And the variety of potato that you grow in your garden really depends on your climate. Now, potatoes are grown from a potato. You start out with a potato, and each potato has little bumps on them called eyes, and that is where they will form shoots from. Now, when you're planting potatoes, you can use potatoes from the store, or you can buy special seed potatoes. Now, I've done both, and they've both worked just as great. However, it is advised to not grow potatoes from the store because sometimes they can carry diseases. When you buy seed potatoes, they are free of diseases, and you know you're not going to be bringing a potato disease into your garden. I haven't ever had that happen in my experience with using store-bought potatoes. But a word of warning, when you're growing potatoes, choose a spot that you want them growing in and you don't mind having little potatoes pop up. This one in particular here, I had just pulled out, yesterday, I pulled out of a bed that I've now got onion growing in, and I saw that this was growing, so I pulled it out, and obviously I missed this potato, so it had sprouted again. We are in winter at the moment, and the potato plants don't like the frost, so you'll have to plant them after your last frost. However, this area here is a bit protected. We've got some big trees over the top, and I do have a couple of potato plants here. Now, I didn't plant them. I grew potatoes in this spot about 2 years ago, and obviously there's still some potatoes in the soil because they have sprouted and grown into plants. And the only reason why they haven't been killed from the frost is because we do have that overhead protection of the trees. But generally, potatoes can't be grown in winter. The frost will kill them. Now also potatoes can take between 75 to 130 days from planting them until you're able to harvest them. So keep that in mind. Check out your climate, your last frost dates, how hot it gets, because potatoes also don't like excessive heat. We had a really hot summer last year and I got the potatoes in the ground too late. They were still growing when summer came along and it killed off the potato plants. Now, there were still tubers in the ground and they have resprouted, but unfortunately we weren't able to harvest a lot of potatoes from that garden bed because of the heat wave that we got, and they just didn't respond well to the heat. So keep that in mind as well. Another thing to know about potato plants is that you cannot eat the leaves. They have a toxic substance called solanine, and consumed that can be toxic and make us really unwell or even cause death. So word of warning, don't eat potato leaves. Plant number 6 is spring onion or bunching onion. And as you can see behind me, this garden bed is filled with spring onion. This particular variety is called everbearing onion, and the reason why I chose to have it in my garden is because it actually multiplies by itself. I don't have to wait for the plant to go to seed. It just automatically multiplies as the plant grows, and then I can dig it up, separate it, and I've got free plants. I actually have a couple of plants here that need to be divided now, so I thought I would quickly show you just how easy it is and how quick it is to get free plants. I'll be digging this section up today, and as you can see, there is a lot of onions coming up from the ground, and when I dig it up, you will see that there are lots of bulbs at the bottom, and that is where I will divide it. Just simply grab a little shovel, pop it in. Now you want to go underneath the plant a fair way so you're not going to damage any roots. And then just push up, and as you do so, the plant will come up. Give it a gentle shake to shake off any excess soil. We want to get all that dirt off because we need to have access to the bulbs, which we will be separating. So to divide them, it is really simple. We're just going to find where there's obviously a bit of a divide there already. You see this is its own little chunk. And I've got another section here. So we're just going to gently pry them apart. Just like that. There we go. Let's see how many we can get from this one plant. As long as there are roots attached, this will take. This is a really, really hardy plant. When I first got this plant, I had about 7 of these single little strips, and now I have hundreds of these plants. So I just need to give them a trim up the top here to cut off all this excess growth, and then I can get them back into the soil. But from one plant, I was able to divide them and get 10 individual plants. How cool is that? We grow this variety of spring onion year-round in our garden. It isn't phased by the frost, which means we can grow it through the winter, and it does tolerate the heat, although on really hot days where we have, a heat wave for a couple or a few days, it does suffer a little bit. However, it tends to bounce back pretty well. Plant number 7 is basil, and although the plant behind me doesn't look like much at the moment, this is actually one of the basil plants that we grew in the garden last summer. The flowers have all dried off now, which means the seeds are ready to harvest, and it is so easy to harvest basil seeds. You just pull off some of the flowers. There they are, and to get the seeds out, you just give the flowers a bit of a rub, just like that. And these little black things right here, that is the seeds. There we go, we've got quite a few there. And I like to just sprinkle them in my garden, and they will pop up in spring when the conditions are right, which is fantastic. Another reason why I love having basil in the garden is not only are the flowers so pretty and you get to harvest delicious basil leaves, but the flowers are also really great for pollinators like bees. when this plant is in its prime, there was a mass of bees around this area of the garden, which is obviously beneficial for your other plants, such as your pumpkins and your capsicums and plants that need pollinators. Plus, who can resist a beautiful smelling basil plant? It is so pretty. You grow basil in spring and summer. However, in some climates, you can grow it through the winter, providing you give it a spot where it's protected from any frost and the temperatures don't get too cold. I do have a spot in the garden where the plants don't get touched by the frost, and that basil plant has been there. We're on its 3rd year now, which is pretty impressive. I haven't had a basil plant live that long. You can also extend their life by cutting off the flower heads and avoid it going to seed, basically. However, I don't see the fun in that, because then you're getting rid of the pretty flowers and you won't have the lovely bees coming in as well. Now, you can either leave this in your garden or you can go collecting all of these seeds. I personally leave it in the garden. It's another bit of a lazy way to garden, but when I'm ready, I often just pull off some of the flowers and sprinkle them in the garden bed, and they'll pop up when they're ready. I don't tend to harvest the seeds and store them inside. I just kind of leave them here, but if I needed the space, I probably would. I could even pull the plant out and just have it kind of sitting to the side until I needed the seeds. But it's not a deal breaker. I don't need this space. And if I leave it here, the wind will hopefully shake out the seeds, and then I'll have more basil plants popping up on their own. Plant number 8 is celery. And although sometimes celery can be notorious for being difficult to grow in the veggie garden, all of my celery plants that I've got going in the garden at the moment, I didn't plant. I'm not sure how many I've got, maybe around 20 plants, and all of them self-seeded, starting from a celery that I grew in the garden 3 years ago, which is pretty cool. I actually haven't planted a celery seed since. However, when they do sprout up, they're often clumped together in a bunch, so I do have to dig them up and transplant them to an area of the garden where I want them to be. But that's not a big deal. There are, however, a few important things that you need to consider when you're growing celery. Celery prefers cooler weather to grow. It doesn't like high temperatures, and if it is too hot, the celery will often bolt to seed. So just like with some of the other plants we've spoken about, with lettuce and silverbeet, it will form a stem coming up out of the middle, and the seeds will be on top of that. They are very pretty though, and there are thousands of seeds, which is a bonus. Now, another thing about celery is that it does prefer consistent watering. So if you don't give it consistent watering, the stalks will often become stringy and tough, and sometimes they can also be hollow inside. And let's face it, nobody wants their celery to be stringy when they're eating it. Plant number 9 is ginger. Ginger is grown from a rhizome, and just like a potato, it forms eyes or buds on the rhizome, and that is where it will sprout and form its leaves. Now, to grow ginger to its full potential, it does take between 8 and 10 months, and ginger does not tolerate frost, so it's important to grow it after your last frost date. However, you can sprout the rhizome beforehand inside your house or in a greenhouse, just somewhere warm, and once it's sprouted, you can pop it into the soil. You can even plant it before it has sprouted, and it will still sprout under the soil and form shoots. Now, ginger can be pretty fussy, and it doesn't like to have wet feet, but it also doesn't like to fully dry out, so make sure you give it a bit of a happy medium there. Now, ginger is really good for us. It can be used medicinally when you have colds or coughs. You can grate it and add it into dishes in cooking. It is a really fantastic plant to have in the garden. It's time to harvest ginger once the leaves start to die off. However, you can really harvest ginger anytime throughout the growing period as long as it has formed those rhizomes. But if you want a lot of rhizomes, it's best to leave it for that 8 to 10 month period. Once you grow ginger once, you can save a rhizome and plant it back into the ground to grow more. Now, with growing ginger, it tends to grow grow across rather than down. So some people prefer to grow it in a pot rather than outside, especially if they live in a climate where they may not have those 8 to 10 months of outside warm temperatures for the ginger to grow. They can move it into a greenhouse or undercover somewhere where it's nice and warm. So ginger grows well in pots. I grew it in pots last season, and I will be doing the same next season as well. So keep that in mind when you're planting ginger, and it's always important to save a rhizome for planting again the next season. That way you'll never have to buy it again, and you can get free ginger plants. Lastly, plant number 10 is broccoli. Now, broccoli is part of a group of vegetables called cruciferous vegetables, which also include cauliflower, cabbage, kale, and Brussels sprouts. But that also means that they can cross-pollinate with the other vegetables. So it's important that if you want to save your seeds from your broccoli plant, that you have your plant in an area where it's not going to cross-pollinate with those other plants. So have some netting around it, or pop a bag on the plant. Now, how do you get the seeds from your broccoli plant so you can end up with an endless supply of free broccoli seedlings? You're going to have to, unfortunately, sacrifice your beautiful head of broccoli that you've got growing there. At first, the head of broccoli will be nice and firm, and after a while, once you've left it on the plant for too long, the head will start to open and loosen a little bit. That's when you know that the process of going to seed has begun. Eventually, it will start yellowing, and it will form beautiful little yellow flowers on the broccoli head. These will then turn into seed pods, which is where your seeds are. Now, you need to wait a little bit longer, as this process can take quite a few months. You're going to wait until these seed pods have all dried, and at that point, that's when you can harvest your broccoli seeds. Now, at this point, you've got two options. You can either harvest those seeds and take them inside, ready to plant back out next season, or if you're a bit of a lazy gardener like me, you can just leave them on the plant. And when the wind blows, nature will do its thing, and you will have little broccoli seedlings popping up all over your garden. But look at this beautiful little head of broccoli. I'm so excited for it to get bigger so we can harvest it. Well, that's it for today, guys. If I missed a plant that you grow for free in your garden, please make sure that you write it down below in the comments, as I would love to check it out. I hope this video was helpful and encouraging for you. And if it was, please make sure that you give it a like, share it around, and subscribe, as that's going to help my channel out a lot. And I really want to try and encourage others to start a garden and to show really how easy it is to grow your own food. Rightio, well, I hope you can get into your gardens today to plant some seeds, plant some plants, grow some food, and try and be a bit more self-sufficient. But until then, I'll see you all next time. Bye!